Hi everyone, this is the Accounting Trailblazers Podcast, and our trailblazer today is Datja. He is the founder of Vue Tax. He lives in Vegas. He is known as one of the most up and comers in the area to help small businesses improve their financial operations, help them with significant tax savings. Ari, thank you so much for being on the podcast and welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, just to start with, tell us a bit more about your company. Like, what do you do? Who is it for?
Sure. Yeah, so Vue Tax predominantly works with small business owners. So I tend to focus more on them, offering both accounting and tax prep services. But I do work with a lot of professionals too on the tax side.
Okay. When we had our first call, you mentioned that you had started in marketing and then you sort of got into accounting. So, tell us more about how did that happen?
Yeah, so and when I usually tell people it's a bit of a journey. It's kind of confusing how did you go from marketing all the way to accounting? So when I went to university, I majored in marketing, and at the time I thought that was going to be my career path and that was going to be the rest of my life. So after I graduated university, I got my first job in marketing. So I was kind of head of handling marketing for a local pet hospital here in Vegas. They had three locations at the time, and they were looking to expand to their fourth location. So for me, it was really jumping in head first. I gained a lot of experience in marketing. I feel like there was a lot I gained from it that I didn't even learn from my classes, especially with social media. I came to learn it's a little bit more difficult, and I don't give enough credit to the people who do that for a living. So I gained a lot of knowledge on product pricing, product placement, and I think just a really overall rounded experience on marketing. So I think it was a good first time for me in the space. However, I was doing that for about a year and things were going well. However, it I was just kind of unsure whether or not that was going to be the career for me going forward. I was kind of doubting myself a little bit, and was marketing really for me? Not that I hated it or anything, but maybe falling a little out of love of it. So after that, I kind of took a break from that job, and I was doing a little bit of freelance work myself, so just web design and a little bit of social media marketing for some local businesses here in town. So during that time, while I was doing that, I was still kind of wondering, what am I going to do for my career? Where things kind of go from here? And I was a little bit unsure. When I think about it, I knew I still wanted to do my own thing. When I started university, and even after I left, I believe the end goal was I'm going to start my own business and do something on my own. And so where this kind of led me is I was introduced to a family friend who had an accounting firm here in town. And I kind of saw what he was doing, mostly working with small business owners, bookkeeping, tax services, business consulting, kind of a little bit of everything in one. And I saw it as an opportunity where I really just wanted to learn as much as I could. I felt like there was something there. Maybe I'd find some opportunity to learn something, and then eventually, maybe this would be the pathway to starting my own business. So I started working there. This was, I think, a little over 4 years ago now, a little 4 or 5 years ago. And I'll never forget when I first started. It was interesting to say the least. I didn't really have a lot of bookkeeping or tax knowledge. And whatever I knew about accounting was basically just two classes back in college. So it was definitely challenging in the beginning, especially that first tax season. The best way I could describe it felt like a boot camp.
Yeah, I
Everything was
bet, I
somewhat
bet.
yeah, everything felt so new, but it was a very good learning experience. I think the good about that though was I was able to learn a lot in a short period of time. Just a lot of hands-on experience of doing both personal and business returns. And so I feel like that experience was invaluable. So we did that basically for a few more years. And again, like I said, I that's where I was gaining a lot of the tax planning, business consultation, just really had my hands in a lot of spaces. And I was also given the opportunity to have a hand a little bit on the operations side. So kind of modernizing the firm. It was still a bit dated, kind of as you can imagine, the old school way. A lot of still physical paper and whatnot. So I was given a little bit of leeway to change some of the back end infrastructure and really try to modernize the firm. So I did that for some time, and then after a while, I was kind of at another place where, what am I going to do going forward? I wasn't sure if this was going to be where things kind of stopped. I felt like there wasn't a lot of opportunity to grow. So I was kind of left at a point where, the only thing I could really think of was I have to take that jump. I have to make that jump and do my own firm. So this was only, I told you, beginning of last year, where I stepped away and decided to start my own firm. So that's kind of, I'd say, the little short end story of where that went.
That is a very interesting story because people right now, when I talk to young people, right, they're not interested in accounting. They're running away from accounting. And here you were in a different profession that accountants think is better than accounting. You left that and you came to accounting. So what exactly was it about accounting that drew you towards it, right? There's just so much information out there. If you were to Google, should I become an accountant? I mean, I almost guarantee you'll walk out walk out thinking it's not a good place to be. But like for you, like what was it that attracted you towards the profession?
Right. And I'll be honest, looking back at it, I said I had two classes in University of Accounting. And for me, I thought that was my answer, that I was never going to do it. I thought, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with this. But like you said, so I feel like once I got some hands-on experience, I really started getting in the field. I think the part about it for me, and I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but really talking with these small business owners, so getting to understand their needs, kind of where does accounting and tax fit into their lives and their businesses, and kind of seeing how important it is for them to have that support structure, a good team behind them. And as I was, again, like I said, doing tax and accounting, I feel like the part of me that likes to learn and always kind of figure out more. I don't like to leave any stone unturned. I feel like accounting kind of presents many opportunities like that. I like to think of it as problem solving. So I feel like that part of my brain was kind of ticking a little bit more than it was on the marketing side. And so as time went on, I really thought, wow, I like this. Maybe I'm one of the weird ones, but I said, actually, I kind of like this. So I'm going to keep pursuing it, and then, keep enhancing my skill and learn as much as I can.
I think that's a great perspective. They're looking at accounting as problem solving, which is what it is. I was talking to somebody and they're accountants, the husband, the wife, but the kids aren't interested. And we were talking that people who see accounting as a profession, usually these are people who are close to accounting because their parents or uncles, aunts were accountants. They don't really follow in accounting, but people who see accounting as a business or creative or problem solving as you did, they're the ones who are very attracted towards accounting. So it's just great to hear that.
Definitely.
So I have a question. So you started an accounting company, accounting firm. How did you get your first clients? Right. I mean, there's always a challenge for any business, but for
Yes.
you starting an accounting firm so early in the career, how did you
Right.
find your first few clients?
Yeah, no, definitely. I knew that was going to be the biggest challenge, to try to get that first client base. When I originally stepped away and started my own firm, I was fortunate enough that one of my very first clients was someone I had worked with for about a year and built a great relationship with them. And they were very willing and happy to work with me when I first decided to start my own firm. So I was fortunate that I was able to get my first one very early on, just from developing that great relationship and really taking care of them. And they were more than happy to be my first customer and help me get started. So for them, they were a business client. And so it was a tax and bookkeeping client. I was able to pick up a little bit of tax returns towards the tail end of the tax season last year, just by telling everybody I could. I told my parents, I told friends, and they told their friends. I just said, hey, if anybody needs taxes, I just started my own firm. Let's get going on that. So I was able to get a few that way. But as you can imagine, the tax season was kind of dwindling down. And now my challenge was, well, what am I going to do to really get this firm off the ground? During those next few months in the summer, I was doing DoorDash and Uber Eats on the side just to kind of keep some income going, but I wanted the flexibility to still do sales and run the business. I got some inspiration from some people in the agency space, and they were talking about doing more sales, I'd say, than marketing, but it was all through Instagram DMs. And I thought to myself, that sounds like a very aggressive strategy, but there might be something there for me. I then kind of combined that idea with another, I'd say, online bookkeeper I saw who grew their firm doing a Facebook. So they would go into Facebook groups of industries that they thought they were very proficient in and that they could do some business in. And they were basically doing cold outreach to people in these groups. So gaining kind of inspiration during that time and kind of taking the marketing side of my brain, I thought, okay, maybe it's a long shot, but maybe there's a way to apply this to the accounting space. Maybe I can get some bookkeeping clients that way. So what I did was for those couple months, June, July, and August, I was sending about 50 direct messages a day on
Wow.
Instagram to small business owners here in Vegas. I learned 50. The reason why they did that was simply because that's the limit before Instagram starts knocking on my door and saying, "Hey, are you a bot?" They're kind of cutting me off, which is good. 50 is more than enough. But so I either start the morning before work or even during lunch if I was taking a short break. And what I did was specifically for Vegas, and I think this could be applied to other cities. But Vegas is unique in the sense that a lot of the businesses out here are restaurants. And one thing I think we know about restaurants very well, especially in the day of social media, is the big thing for them is they're always posting. I feel like nowadays, if you're a restaurant, you have to be posting your food. That's what people want to see. And that's what's going to get
Yeah.
people to come in the door and try your stuff. So my thought process was these businesses have to be the most active on social media out of all the other businesses. And then I'll be able to easily find hundreds, if not thousands of businesses in this space. What I did was I went by hashtag. So a little bit of my marketing hacking. I went by hashtag for Vegas. It was Las Vegas Foodie or LV Foodie, similar to that. And you would just see hundreds of thousands of photos and videos from all these small business owners. And so my thought process was, okay, I have enough of a potential base of prospects, so let's get to work. So I would literally go down the list. I'm following each of these businesses. I'm sending a direct message and, maybe I'm fortunate to get the owner, if not somebody managing the page, but I would send 50 messages a day. I kept the message very brief and direct. I think people know that when you're reaching out to them, you're likely trying to sell them something. So I think the time of trying to cover the sale and pretend like you're not is not the right approach. So I was very direct saying, hey, I'm a new accounting firm in Vegas. I'm offering bookkeeping services. Would you be interested in doing a short Zoom call or consultation? And so I kept it brief and I was direct. And for a while, there was no responses. I did get some no's. And what I learned in sales, is no is not a bad thing either. At least that means people are reading it and considering it. So I just thanked
Yeah.
them and said, hey, have a good day. So, but then about a week or two into it, I remember I was just wrapping up one of my dashes and I was in the parking lot and I remember getting my first DM where I had a business in town said, hey, yeah, actually, we are looking for a bookkeeper. I'd be interested in setting up a call. And I was excited. I was so excited. I thought, man, I didn't think I was going to get anything from it. It was a bit of a long shot, but I kind of had that mentality of, what the heck, let's give it a shot. And they were willing to set up a call. And so they were my very first bookkeeping client that, didn't come from somebody I knew, complete stranger. And discovery call went great. They were happy and they signed up with me a couple days after. And the funny thing is that same day, about an hour later, I got another DM from a coffee shop here in town who, similar story, they kind of went through two accountants, accountant and CPA. They just were having a hard time finding the right service and help that they were looking for. So again, set up a discovery call with them. Things went great and they were willing to give me a shot. And so I was able to sign them up, and next thing you know, I had my third bookkeeping client. So
That's awesome.
slowly I just kind of kept doing that.
I can still see that excitement on your face when you were describing your first client, your second client. I could see your face light up. I could see those emotions. And I mean, as a business owner, I can relate, like getting that first client, getting those first few, it's always challenging. But so I loved it. Like you got the first one, you were working with somebody, then it goes family and friends, and then you put your marketing experience to use, right? And you went on social media. I think that is very, very creative. I want to talk about the emotional side of things, right? You were door dashing, you were young. I mean, you are young and you had this new firm. Like that's got to take a toll on you. So how did you manage the emotional side of starting a business when your competition is maybe 40, 50-year-old accountants who've been doing this for 20, 30
Oh, yeah.
years? So how did you manage that part? Because I think that's what scares a lot of people into taking the plunge.
Yeah. No, definitely. It was a challenge. I'd be lying if I didn't say there was an emotional toll to it. And, there was very many moments, even after stepping away and even starting it and during the process, where I thought to myself, did I make the right decision? Is this going to work? I mean, there were some days where, especially dashing, I'm just thinking to myself, like, is this going to go, how long is this going to go on for before I finally break through? And so there were some very emotionally testing times. I was fortunate to have good friends and family where, I could talk about it, kind of be honest about how that experience was going, some of the good, some of the bad. And I definitely think that helped out a lot. I think it can be scary to make that first plunge into doing your own thing, especially in an accounting firm. Here in town, like you said, there's plenty of professionals. Maybe you could even think to yourself, people more qualified than yourself. But, I think what I took out of it was stepping away was already a big decision for me, but I think it was the right one. At least, although all the challenges that I did have to face in growing the firm, I think I was happier in the sense that I was able to do things the way I wanted to do, and I was able to serve clients the way I wanted to serve them, so that was a big part that kind of kept me uplifted. The other part was during those DoorDashes, I feel like I'm a big education buff. So I was always listening to content from other creators, to keep me motivated. And a lot of it too was related to marketing, funny enough. I kind of wanted to go back to my roots, find some comfort there. And I think the more I was able to put a picture together of how I might be able to break through, I think the more comfortable and more confident I started getting in myself to keep going, and keep building the firm. So, but yeah, there were some times that were very harsh. So, but I think you have to look at the big picture and staying optimistic, even when times are a little down, a little rough. I think with enough persistence, and that's the thing we don't give ourselves a lot of the time. It's very easy to cut yourself short and not give it enough time to see if it'll actually succeed. A month or two is not enough. I've come to realize that. It might take several months, a year. Even now that I'm in my year and a half, I still face the idea like, okay, there's going to be some more challenges and hurdles to continue this growth. But if you stick through it long enough and you do the day to day, the stuff that people might not find too fun, you're going to make some headway. So you need to think, I think, long term when you're building this. So the hardest part is getting going, right? That initial part. So if you can get over that hurdle, I think you'll be better off and a little bit more confident going forward from there.
That makes sense. I think you said it right. It takes time. A few months is just not enough. It has to be. It has to be more. It's hard to say how long, but I mean, definitely years, right? 2 or 3 years before you get to a stage where you're like, it all paid off. Um, I want to talk about
Sure, sure, sure.
building trust, right? When you get your first clients, right, as a new kid on the block, how did you
Yep.
go about building trust? So, and I'm talking not the clients that you'd worked with, not family and friends. Yes, I get that part, but the newer ones, like how do you build trust? How do you get them
Yeah.
to take a chance on you?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And I knew that was going to be a big hurdle. The way I looked at it was I knew I was qualified. I don't doubt that there's people out there, they know they have the qualifications, they've done the work. There would be no problem doing business with some of these business owners. I think the challenge though is even with all the expertise, even if I laid it out all there, the challenge was going to be I'm a stranger. I'm not necessarily on the internet now with my own firm. It's brand new. So there's nothing to go off of. So people are naturally going to be a little bit hesitant, do I want to work with this person? There's people who've been around, like you said, way longer. So that I know they have 50 reviews or something like that. They have referrals, right? People are talking about them. Hey, yeah, I use this guy, you should, or I use this gal, you should go see them. So I knew that was going to be a big challenge. And so I think what helped out a lot, there's one case I can think of. Like I said, when I got my second or my third bookkeeping client, that coffee shop, this was one of those instances very early on where, she had already worked with two other accountants and didn't have a good experience. So was already kind of a little bit iffy, with that third accountant who was going to come in and take over. And when I had that discovery call with her, everything was great. But one of the things she asked towards the end was, hey, do you have any clients you've worked with in your own firm, any that could recommend or say anything or kind of talk on your behalf, like good experience. And it was challenging, right? Because I didn't have many. I only had a very few, and the oldest only being a couple months. So it's hard to say that anybody would go out of their way to say, yeah, I would recommend this guy. And so it was a challenging thing. But one thing I took away was I wanted to start the firm with, first of all, being honest. I need to be very direct with these clients because I want to set that precedent right off the bat. I don't want them to think differently of me or have a different expectation. And then down the road, it's different from what they thought. So I was honest with her. I said, I just started my own firm. I don't have really a lot of people that have been long enough that would be able to do that. You taking a chance on me, I would appreciate it, but whatever decision you go with, I'll respect that either way. And it was challenging because I really needed that. Every client mattered that I could get to get this firm off the ground. But I knew integrity and by being straightforward right off the beginning would earn me a lot more down the road. And thankfully, she did say yes. And now when we talk today, I think earlier at the beginning of this year was one of the first reviews that I got left on Google reviews as they started coming in. And she even told me, she's like, how can I help you? And I said, it'd be great if you could leave a review. I'm glad you've been happy with me and that you really love the experience and I've taken great care of you. It would be very helpful if you can go talk about that on Google. And so for those next 6 months after that summer, kind of the tail end of last year, all those clients I was accumulating, I think a big thing was my goal is to go above and beyond. And by doing that, it's simply communication. A lot of the times what I hear in these discovery calls when people are moving or thinking about transitioning, it seems to be communication is the big issue that pops up all the time. That there was some kind of breakdown or lack of communication, having to chase down your accountant during tax time, or, maybe they're looking for tax planning towards the end of the year and they can't find you. And, that's a big sticking point to them. A lot of the time it wasn't pricing. It was simply just that they wanted to know that they could communicate with their accountant. They could reach them. And so I made sure those 6 months I went above and beyond, to make sure that they were very well taken care of. Any questions they had, any help that they need, it was, met. And by the time the new year started this year, I felt like after that 6 months, I was able to build a lot of trust with these clients to the point where some of them did start referring me some business clients. And also they were willing to, like I said, go on Google reviews and leave a nice review for me. So I was able to start building that online validation too, so that people can see like, oh yeah, this guy not only exists, but business owners really like what he has to offer, And so I think it took some time, but like I said, in that beginning part, when trust is a challenge, I think being honest and straightforward. And I also think, go a little bit above and beyond for that period of time, because you really want to build that strong foundation, because they're going to kind of be that life after the fact. They're going to be the ones that are potentially referring you other business clients. So I think invest in the beginning, and then in the long road, the payoff will be great.
I think all the things you're saying, it's such a good step-by-step playbook for anybody who wants to start their own firm. Now, I have just a few more questions left. As you think about building your firm, what's your vision like? How do you want to build the firms in terms of operations? Like, there's a lot of talk about building a modern firm, right? Because a lot of accounting firms right now are considered like dated, not just in the way they operate, but the way they think and everything. So when you think about yourself as a new young firm, like how do you think you're going to do things differently, or how are you planning to build that modern firm, if you will?
Right. Yeah. The space is definitely seeing a lot of change, and coming from, working at a firm that again had that same kind of dated experience that we talked about and helping that modernization. I think there's a few components. I think there's the technological component. We're in 2025 now, and even in the accounting space, there has been some innovation that's coming and is already here, kind of to help improve and uh, make the jobs of accountants a little bit easier, and firm owners too. So I feel like one part is having a good tech stack. Although I do occasionally meet clients in person at my office, the predominant, I'd say 90%, 95% of client meetings and experience is done virtually. So same setup I'm talking to you right now. I have that with my clients. Most of the time we're just meeting on Zoom. So I feel like that's one tool in the box. I think it makes you more accessible. I think you want to have that option of meeting virtually, even if you're not the most comfortable in front of the camera. But you're providing an easier experience for your clients and allowing them easier access to you. And so I think that's one component. The other is I use a fairly good CRM system, Axtome, and the play there is just, again, I don't have any physical documents. All of those are uploaded digitally. All signatures are handled digitally too. It's all e-signatures. So, and then the third component is payment. All payment is done, whether they pay with bank account or credit card, that's all done through the portal. So my thought process is the least amount of tools possible, and however you can make yourself as accessible to the client as possible. We want simplicity. And I think anything in between that kind of acts as friction or might hinder that experience, you want to try to find a way to eliminate that. So we want to make getting from A to Z as simple as possible for the client. And then, kind of on the sales side or product side, I think the way at least I approached it, and I think a good way maybe to approach is you want to try to productize your offering as much as possible. So I think sometimes we get things a little too complex when we're trying to think of pricing and our product offering. And then as a result, a lot of the time we might be undervaluing ourselves more often than not. I would say overvaluing, but most of the time we're undervaluing our services. So the way I took that approach is I kind of think of them as buckets. So I offer a line of products, whether they be tax or accounting. And from there, those buckets, it's kind of during the discovery call, it's figuring out what bucket does that client fall into. And then as we're going through the discovery call, and I kind of figure out there's other problems or challenges that they're facing, it's very easy then to think of it as kind of like a la carte. Any other additional items that they do need, we just kind of tack it on to the bundle. So that way you have full customization. You're able to tailor to the client's needs, but also not overcomplicate your offering. So during the sales process, it's very easy for you to understand where they fall, what they need, and then kind of package that and send it over to them. So I think that is also important, simplifying your product offering and really getting the sales part down. And then finally, I would say, at least for me, with AI kind of being the hot topic now, I do daily utilize AI in my business. I feel like it's still being explored. I think even in the accounting space, I think some people are trying to get their hand on it or play around a little bit to see where is this going to help them or what differences it's going to make. But at least for me, I'd say on a daily basis, I am utilizing it in some form of fashion. So I think in the future too, that's going to be some consideration when we think about modern firms. What role will AI play in the mix? From day-to-day operations. So,
I loved your answer, and I'll tell you why. I asked that question to a lot of firm owners that how are you planning to build a modern firm? And everybody goes straight to talking about tools that, oh, we're using this tool, we're using that tool. But you started by putting the customer, the client in front, right? You were like, well, I want to make it easier for the client to access me, to communicate with me, and here's what I'm doing for that. Then even for the sales process, you're like, well, I want to make it easier, so here's what I'm doing. So you started with the problem, and then you started talking about the tool or the product. And I think that thinking is what that's what a modern firm looks like. It's not the products you use, but it's how you think about it. So that was a great answer. I loved it. So one last question before I let you go. Like, what advice do you have for aspiring firm owners?
yeah, I mean, I would say, talking with a lot of accountants, I've been to some events talking with accountants and CPAs. I feel like what I'm gathering is there's no better time than now to start your own firm if you're thinking about it. I think the space is seeing a lot of change. I know one of the issues we're facing is that the accounting space, there's a bit of a lack of people entering the field, a lot of new students and people going into the field, and we also have a lot of people retiring out of the space. It's a very the industry is changing, but it can be a good opportunity for those who are looking to enter the space. So what I would say to them is, if you are thinking about it, you know, put a bit of a plan together. Do a little bit of your due diligence, see what you need, but it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot to get your own firm going. So you shouldn't be held back by that idea. I think the biggest challenge is likely fear, and that's understandable. Giving up what you got to get what you want. And so sometimes that can be a little scary, but I would say the payoff is rewarding. I think at the end of the day, you want to make that move. And I think that you'll be happier doing that. So I would say make that leap, stick to your plan, understand that it is a bit challenging. There are going to be some hurdles, but there's always a solution to everything. So, go for it. And I think best of luck to it.
Eric, thank you so much. To my listeners, to my viewers, if you are thinking about starting a firm or even thinking about whether or not to become an accountant, this is the episode for you. Eric, thank you so much again for being on the podcast, being a guest and sharing all these wonderful insights.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.